Okay, so we are in session 6, and today we are going to look at the rise of Roman Catholicism, and that's what we're going to do. Just give me a moment to get my PPT up, then we will jump in. Okay, can you see my screen? Am I visible?
Yes, Pastor, is visible. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so we're in session 6 today, and we're looking at the rise of the Catholic Church, the way we know it today. Remember that the church in Rome existed right from the first century, and it's only the aspect of how did it turn into the Roman Catholic Church that we know today. That's the part that we are looking at. All right, but the church has always existed in Rome right from the first century church onwards. But that was a very different church. That was a home church, like a house church, 28 different house churches in Rome, and various other ways that the early church operated, which were very different from what we today know as the Roman Catholic Church. All right. And so there is a point in the history of the Roman church that it turns directions and becomes this. And that's what we are looking at. All right. As we look at the session today. Okay, now, uh, what are we covering today? We're kind of covering from what is approximately 476 AD all the way up to 1054 AD. We are not quite covering the events in 1054, but we are running up till the events that are coming till there. In 1054 AD, the church splits into two. And it becomes what we today call as the Western Church and the Eastern Church. All right. And so, in that sense, it becomes a division, a denomination. And that's one of the aspects that we can clearly see. Just give me a moment. Just hold on. Okay. Sorry. So in 476 AD, Rome falls politically. What we know as the erstwhile Roman Empire, the Roman Empire falls and collapses. And as Rome falls, the Pope becomes a key unifying figure that brings together the so-called political entity and, of course, the spiritual entity. We see the rise of papacy steadily as we see that various kings and alliances were brought together. And we can see this even from 440 AD onwards, but it starts growing. And it comes because of the way that the papal agency went about, or the Bishop of Rome went about, suppressing the others or bringing the others under him. All right. And so that's the way that it slowly started. accumulating and becoming what we today call as the Roman Catholic Church. By 496 AD, we can see that strategic alliances were being formed by the breakaway nations. There were many breakaway nations from the Roman Empire, and all of what we see today as the Europe came from the Roman Empire. Okay, it broke into different nations, different pieces, but each of these nations were united by the Pope, with him acting as the spiritual authority. So he started building strategic alliances with all of these kings and started exercising spiritual authority over these people. And like that, he started cobbling together, you could say, like a empire in both political and spiritual terms. We will see that during this time, that monasticism, the idea that we talked last time about how monasteries were built and grew, and how they carried forward the idea of raising people and resources in terms of the church. So those are something that you will see uh, growing very well during this time. So monasteries like those of the Benedictines were preserving classical knowledge. They copied manuscripts and served as centers of learning and social aid. Economics, we can see how the church influenced the flow of money by putting together certain ideas like the tithing, donations, land grants, and they ended up becoming richer than even the kings across Europe. They started becoming richer and richer, and through this process, the church becomes a very strong financial entity. Canonic law, the church developed its own legal system, and this kind of transcended the local nations' laws. They started becoming like a persistent and pervasive kind of system, a legal system, and it started overriding even the local laws of the nations that were under them. And missionary work, the church actively converted pagans across Europe, whether it were the Celts, the Germans, the Vikings, and the Slavs. We talked about some of these last time, and this was actively engaged in by the church. Okay, so this is one of the things that we will see in this. As we look through this timeline, we will see that all of this was happening, right? Okay. Okay, so let's jump into the political events through this period. Approximately about 500 years that we are covering, and we see what happened. First of all, the fall of the Roman Empire, and we see that the Pope steps in. And one of the things that happens during this period is a power vacuum. When Rome collapses, no central political authority remained in Western Europe. The Pope, as the Bishop of Rome, claimed to be the successor of Saint Peter, and he was considered the leader of the apostles and the first Bishop of Rome, that is Saint Peter. Though that is not a historically proven fact, but yet it was kind of purported to be that way, and it ends up be like, by proxy being a claim by the Pope that he is descended in apostolic authority from Saint Peter. So this belief in apostolic succession gave the papacy a special status among all bishops. So they used verses like Matthew 16:18 to 19, and used that as a basis to claim universal jurisdiction over all Christians. All right, not just in Rome, not just in the regions around it, but all over everywhere. Okay, and the other thing that's happening here, like we said, is that the Bishop of Rome, whom we call the Pope, became a key unifying figure. He stepped into the roles which were once held by Roman governors and emperors. So he started stepping into the political roles to kind of strengthen the nations that were coming out of this divide. The Roman Church retained much of its administrative legacy of the Roman Empire. Hierarchy, record keeping, communication networks, all of this was retained. And the Pope became a symbol of order and continuity. So, this was one way that Europe started feeling a sense of common identity and unification, even though there were different groups of people and different tribes and different kinds of nations and communities. But this Christianity, the church, all of this brought together a unifying sense of identity. So, as the rise of papacy happens, we will also see that the monastic system grows, and it focused primarily on deepening the personal faith. And we find that missionary work was raised up through this to be able to go to new regions. So, papal authority grew steadily, and the main people who asserted and developed this was people like Pope Leo the First. He was from 440 AD to 446 AD, 461 AD, and he asserted that the Pope was the supreme leader of the Christian Church. He was one of the primary proponents of this idea. Before this idea was not as strongly held, and every region had its own bishops, and so and they were independent of each other. But this is where you see that assertion to bring people under him. Pope Gregory the First, who lived from 590 to 604, he strengthened the church's administrative systems. He reformed the liturgy, and in fact, the Gregorian chant is named after him. And he conducted missionary work. He sent people to what we today call as England, converting the Anglo-Saxons. And so, this idea that the Pope was seen as the spiritual heir of Saint Peter gave religious legitimacy. And that is one of the things that we see very clearly. Right? Now, he's not just playing the role of a religious leader, but he's also playing the role of a political leader. And even as the secular entities were declining, he started rising to fill the gaps. Pope negotiated treaties, he settled disputes, he acted as a diplomatic mediator between the kingdoms. So we can see that all these kind of roles by de facto ended up with the Pope, because he was assumed as a third party who is neutral and could get involved in any disputes between the different kingdoms. And so some examples of this we see. Pope Leo the First met with Attila the Hun in 452 AD and convinced him not to sack Rome. Okay, and this boosted Pope's image as a protector of the city and faith. Now, of course, his considerations probably were political, but you can see that he played these roles and procured a better image in the eyes of the people. Pope Gregory the First administered civil affairs in Rome. He organized defense, he fed the poor, and even managed military operations when the imperial government failed. So you can see how the Pope is becoming a rising parallel governing entity. And while the secular government is collapsing, he is one who's rising to that gap. Now, he had strategic alliances with the kings, and we see that the church supported and was supported by the rulers. So they supported the rulers in different ways, and the rulers supported them in different ways. So we see an alliance with Frankish kings, and so the papacy cemented power by aligning with powerful rulers. Pope Stephen II allied with Pepin the Short, father of Charlemagne, who received the donation of Pepin from which created the Papal States and territories in central Italy, which are today also ruled directly by the Pope, which is called as the Vatican. So even during these times, you can see that he is the one who's kind of aligning and brokering different treaties with these powerful rulers, right? The church supported and was supported by rulers. Clovis the First, we talked about this Frankish king last time. He was converted to Christianity in 496 AD, and his descendants, the Merovingians, became Christian allies. Uh, Charlemagne, who was crowned as emperor in 800 by Pope Leo III, is a very famous French king and is someone who revived the Western Roman Empire as the Holy Roman Empire. So, this is a title that the Pope got from the Roman emperors, the Roman emperor's title of being the Holy Roman Emperor. And he gave that title to people as he decided. And he started crowning different European kings as the Holy Roman Emperor, and they became the Holy Roman Empire, the representation of the Pope during that period. So he tied political power directly to the church. And this church state partnership gave church land, armies, and legitimacy, while rulers gained divine approval. Now, today we know that we don't ascribe to this model because we talk about the arm's length separation between state and church, right? And that idea comes because of the abuse of power. And so the church and state partnership that the Roman Catholic Church ended up doing was something that was definitely that led to many problems later on. The development of papal doctrine and the idea of um, supremacy is something that is again developed by the Pope. So you can see that over these centuries, they developed strong theological arguments for authority. So there is the so-called Dictatus Papae, which is developed in 1075 AD, but it is actually coming from much earlier, and it summarized key beliefs. All right, only the Pope could depose an emperor. Now think of that. The Pope is the only one who can remove an emperor. Now that's an idea that kind of definitely gives the power into the Pope's hand, right? The Roman Church had never erred and would never would. So he declared with his authority that the Roman Church is perfect. It can never make a mistake. It can never do anything wrong. And it never will. Earlier, Pope Gelasius, who lived from 492 AD to 496 AD, he laid the foundation with the doctrine of two powers, spiritual and temporal. And he claimed that the church held spiritual supremacy over the kings. So this was the first step. And from there, they came to a place where they developed the idea that the Pope could control who rules in these European nations. The papacy asserted that they had primacy over all bishops, including in places like Gaul, Germany, Britain. They had the authority to call councils and resolve disputes, and they had the exclusive right to interpret scripture and define orthodoxy. Although this was sometimes contested, this primacy was increasingly accepted in the West. And this is where the trouble starts. When one person has the power to decide what is the truth and they can control it, then they can control everything. And that's what you can see happening here. So the papal power started rising and they became more and more increasingly powerful over everything that was happening in the nations. They also started having tensions with the Eastern Church, and the papacy also grew by breaking with Eastern control. Initially, Rome was part of the five patriarchies. These are the five city states, so to say, that were, considered very important in the early church. So that's Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. But later on, they started breaking away from this. And the reason is because Rome started insisting on supremacy, while the East, especially Constantinople, viewed Pope as first among equals. So if the remember the Pope is just the Bishop of Rome, but he started insisting that he was greater than all the other bishops, and therefore that started creating trouble. And Constantinople gave a little bit of importance to the Pope. They treated him like he was first among equals, but even that was not enough for them. Pope wanted to be absolute, absolute control. So then came disputes over theology. The filioque clause is basically the idea about whether the authority comes from the Holy Spirit or not. This is the cause for one of the councils that were called. And papal authority, they had disputes over this. Liturgical differences started becoming more and more intensified. All of this was differences over theology that they started having between uh, the the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Church. These tensions are the ones that eventually lead to the Great Schism that happens in 1054 AD. The Great Schism is basically the great divide that separates the Eastern and the Western Church. And that happens in 1054 AD. Monasticism and education. There were some good things too during these times. And those primarily came through the monasteries and the monasticism, the whole system, like those of the Benedictines and many other orders that came later on, like the Jesuits and so on. They preserved classical knowledge, copied manuscripts, and served as centers of learning and social aid, which is great. That means they started developing the common man from his situation and started enabling him. The church controlled education, literacy, and theology, and thereby they shaped culture and thought. So, this is good and this can be bad. It started with a good idea, but later on it became a bad idea. It started because it started helping and enabling people to grow in education and in being able to also understand God and being able to understand themselves and the whole message of the gospel and grow deeper in the word. All of that is the idea with which it started. But and it even influenced the culture and the thought of the day. But later on, it is these very things that's going to control and suppress people, and it led to a lot of other problems. Monastic wealth and agriculture estate. These monasteries were not just spiritual centers, they were economic powerhouses. They controlled vast agricultural estates, and these were worked on by peasants or serfs. So it was a business by itself, and it was controlling and earning wealth for the church. They produced wine, wool, cheese, and other goods. They innovated in farming techniques, record keeping, and land management. There were rich monasteries like Cluny, which was founded in 910 AD, had their own income streams and were exempt from any local feudal control. They only directly answered to the Pope. So you had these exempted monasteries across the empire, and you can see that they only answered directly to the Pope, not even to the local king. Uh, so economically, they imposed uh, tax, 10% as tithes, donations. The church received a lot of donations from people, and land grants. Land grants were what the kings gave to the church when they wanted to achieve something. And these ended up with the church amassing large land holdings, and their land holdings were even more than the king's. The church lands were tax free and they were run by bishops or abbots, giving the church direct control over large territories. Monarchs and aristocrats donated land to the church for several reasons. One could be to gain favor with the church and some form of divine blessing, to atone for sins or secure salvation. As political alliances, land grants often came with expectations of papal support. They also had wealth from pilgrimages and relics. Major pilgrimage sites like Rome, the Santiago de Compostela, or monasteries with famous relics. All of these attracted thousands of pilgrims, and these pilgrims donated generously and spent money locally, and this boosted the church and the monastic income. The shrines holding relics became tourist centers, and some competed for status and wealth. So you can see that these places started growing and becoming money making tourism centers for the church. Canonic law. The canonic law is that the church developed its own legal system. They did not care what the local laws were. The church law or the canon law was greater than the local law. So the church developed its own legal system and often acted as the moral and judicial authority. Most kings often submitted to the Pope's arbitration in disputes. When there's a division of opinion, it's the Pope who decides how things are finally settled. All right, so that's the canon law. Missionary work. The church actively converted pagans across Europe. And we can see that because we know that even from last time's discussion that various places started coming under the Christian the control, especially under the church. Okay, the church actively converted pagans across Europe, whether it is the Celts, the Germans, the Vikings, or the Slavs. And each tribe converted often under royal influence. They joined Rome's ecclesiastical structure and they expanded the church's geographical reach. What are the methods used by these missionaries? These missionaries are often the monks from these different monastic orders that are being sent to different places to reach out to the people. The conversion of rulers first. Missionaries often focused on baptizing kings or chieftains who then mandated conversion among their people, which is convenient because once you reach the leader, then it kind of crosses over very quickly across the people. And so that's one. Second is the adaptation of local customs. Many missionaries Christianized pagan festivals, holy sites, and symbols rather than erudicating them outright. They kind of made sure that these were acceptable to the people, because if you just immediately eradicated them, there would be like you could say like a friction among the people, negative reaction. So they did it gradually. And what's interesting is the Catholic Church is famous for it even today. We find that the Catholic Church, even today, adopts and includes very inclusive in the local culture and its practices wherever they are. And it need not be a good thing. It could have been, but it isn't. The use of Latin education and liturgy, this spread Roman Christian culture and strengthened ties with the papacy. So they make Latin the mode of education, of course, being the common language of Roman Empire. It is understandable why Latin would be the language that is across the empire. but they also made it a regular aspect of the education and the liturgy. And this ensured that Latin and the Roman culture continued for some more time. And eventually, it started building a divide because the local language and the people, what they understood, started going further and further away from what Latin was. And so you would find that they no longer understood the scriptures. This spread Roman Catholic culture and strengthened the ties with the papacy. Monasteries acted as bases, and the monasteries served as mission hubs. They offered food, shelter, schooling, worship, and they slowly integrate the local populations into the church. Here is some of the places where the missionary focus was. The British Islands, Anglo-Saxons, Scots, Irish, they were reached by the Roman Catholic Church. Germanic Europe, which is the Franks, Alemanni, the Saxons, the Bavarians. So this is all basically the central part of Europe, from what we today call Spain, Spain, France, and those directions. Scandinavian countries like the Danes, Norwegians, and the Swedes. Slavic lands like the Moravians, Bohemians, the Poles, the Croats. Eastern Europe, the Bulgars, and the Hungarians. So all of these were reached through missionary work. Different people at different points reached these places. Now all of this was still leading to a very strong discontentment between the rising Roman Church and other people like the Eastern churches that especially stood up in opposition. And this is what is leading to this division, the schism, and this brought discontentment. There were objections as the Roman bishop started exercising control and started bringing other people under him. Then there was objections from others, and those objections, some of them I'm just listing. The Eastern Patriarchs, that is Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, they objected and said, hey, we don't acknowledge the Bishop of Rome as the primacy of honor due to the apostolic heritage and status. But they said that they rejected the Rome Pope's claim to universal jurisdiction. They don't mind acknowledging because the Bishop of Rome is one of the oldest cities and the centers of Christianity. And so, being that, we don't mind treating you as first among equals, but we will not treat you as supreme. All right, that's the idea. So, they rejected the Pope's claim. They argued for a collegial model of church leadership with all five patriarchs. That is, all of these places would come together and govern together the entire region and take care of things, even in terms of the leadership. So that's the aspect that is being told here. The Pope's assertion of jurisdiction over the so this is again coming from Eastern patriarchs and theologians. So there's a letter from Patriarch Michael. This is all the way down at the 10th and 11th century, and one of the final written objections before the divide happened. Michael Cerullius, who's the Patriarchy of Constantinople, he denounces Roman practices such as the use of unleavened bread in the Eucharist, the Pope's insertion of the Filoque clause, that means and the Son, into the Nicene Creed, the Pope's assertion of jurisdiction over the East. His letter and the mutual excommunications that followed formally split the Eastern and the Western churches in 1054 AD. So this is how gradually the division started deepening and started coming to a place where they can no longer sit together and agree. Photius of Constantinople. This is again a little earlier than this. We see this in the 858 to 867, 877 to 886. There was a strongly worded objection in writing. The Patriarchy Photius, he criticized the Pope in multiple documents, especially over the Philocue clause, his interference in the Bulgarian church's matters, his mistakes of the Holy Spirit. Basically, Photius argued that the Philocue was heretical and a corruption of true doctrine. He also wrote letters to Eastern bishops denouncing the papal overreach, and his writings became the foundation of Eastern Orthodox opposition to the papacy. Even amongst the European nations, there were objections. Local Western objections, though they were less frequent, but they were present. Some of the Frankish bishops during the 8th to 9th century, theologians like um, I think that's a treatise, the Libri Carolini. It challenged the papal authority on certain theological grounds, especially regarding the iconoclast debates, which is basically using certain pictures and images in your worship. These objections weren't about papal supremacy per se, but they showed that Rome's authority wasn't absolute even in the West. So we can see there were objections even among the Western nations. All right. So this gives you an idea of what is happening and how the church is starting to rise and starting to become powerful. And we see that the Roman Catholic Church starts becoming wealthy, starts becoming politically powerful, and starts becoming corrupt. It's growing in its corruption. It is no longer focused on the spiritual. It starts becoming about authority and power and wealth, and starts controlling people, establishing control over everything else. That's basically what we see. So, what lessons can we take away from this session? What is it that we can understand? Well, one of the big problems that we see is that autocracy, decision making, when power corrupts and when that power is absolute in one person, then absolute power corrupts absolutely. All right. And that's the danger over here. So we find that these guys, the popes exercised authority without any form of overseeing, any form of people being accountable. So you find this challenge today that even as we see that this church was becoming increasingly corrupt, increasingly not being able to deal with the truth and deal with things in the right way, you can see they compromised. They compromised spiritually, they compromised politically, they compromised on the truth, and they kept compromising and going on down this road. So there is that problem that you can see here when it's absolute power in one person called the Pope or any model like this, it ends up in corruption, absolutely. And eventually, by the time we reach the 15th century, you're going to find that the people were fed up with this church, with the Roman Catholic Church. But we also have the other problem today. Democracy divides. Absolute democracy divides completely. That's also a problem. When you have democracy which is like used in a way that is that I have the right to express myself and do whatever I feel like in whichever way I feel like and whenever I feel like, then you will only promote division. And this is what we see in the church today, that you are so divided that you cannot come together and work together and agree on it. That is the problem of taking democracy too far. When you start taking autocracy too far, it has a problem. When you start taking democracy too far, there is a problem. So one of the ideas that the Bible proposes is called theocracy. God the ruler to whom everybody surrenders or submits. And the reverence of acknowledging him in every decision is very important. You don't make decisions without him at all. He has to be involved in every decision making. And that's the way that the Bible suggests doing this right. So it's a lesson because churches can become corrupt and do become corrupt and are corrupt today. And there are various reasons for it. But one of the key problems is how we go about our decision making. Are we autocratic? Are we democratic? Or are we theocratic? That's the question. We got to be able to be people who understand the maturity of what it means to make the right decision and not let corruption creep into our lives or the life of the church. Either of this is a problem. All right. So that's the lesson I'm leaving with you. How do we make decisions today? How do we go about it? And how can we deal with biblical decisions and decision making process? Okay. So that's the lesson I leave you with today. All right. Any questions? Any questions, any thoughts, any discussions that you would like?
One question that I always had is actually when you speak about theocratic, so how does this, okay, if the theocratic means, how does it comes when it comes to a day-to-day functioning of the church, day-to-day management, program planning? How are we, how does it practically looking? One of the questions that many times even I had was, any thoughts that you have?
So where do we get this idea from? We get this idea from the pre-Kings era of the Old Testament Israel. We find that in the discussions primarily between God, the people, and Samuel, you'll find that there is this pattern that God reveals, which is that I am their king, I am their leader, I am the supreme authority. Or even in the New Testament, we have that idea that Christ is the head of the church. So this is where we get the concept of theocracy. Theocracy is God the ruler, and everything submits to him. But in the same, going back again to that example, where the conflict comes is when the people say, no, we want to see someone and have someone who's visible. And so then what happens is when the king comes in, as long as the king is in submission to God, the concept of theocracy can still work. But the moment the king is not in submission to God, the idea fails. Then, in contrast, today in democracy, the problem is because everything is democracy basically follows the idea of the majority principle, right? And the problem of majority is if majority loses morality, then majority loses God. And so everybody is divided. So this is the problem of submission, leadership, authority in today's world. Now, in different contexts, this can be applied differently. So, for example, we don't have the time to discuss every single situation, but I'll just pick up some examples. So, how do we apply something like this in a leadership context? So, today, for example, in church, how do elders make a decision? Well, in a theocratic model, the idea is consensus for every decision. That means all the elders must agree on the same decision. There is no democracy. That is, if 51% agree, then the decision is voted in. That is democracy. Or autocracy, whereas that one person makes all the decision. Neither of this, but theocracy is all of them must agree, and which means everybody must be led by the Holy Spirit to come to one decision. And if you cannot come to one decision, then you will shelf it. This is a simple approach of implementing the idea of theocracy in today's context of elders in the church. This is one way, right? And so, again, going back to the judges and God and the people of Israel, the people wanted someone whom they can influence and control. They did not like the fact that they had to directly rely on God. And this is where the failure of the model happens with the judges and the people. But what is the issue there? When morality slides, then everything fails. And that's the weakness of democracy. When morality slides, the majority fails. And when the majority fails, then there is nothing left. This is the problem we see in today's world with all of the major philosophical ideas. Like, for example, let's take something like should a family be a man, woman, and their children? Or can it be two men, two women, and adopted kids? Or some other mode of a family? Now, who decides this? Actually, what you will find is that the courts are stuck with being able to conclude on this matter, even if we refer to the Supreme Court of the US or refer to the decisions of the Supreme Court in India. Both of them have had a struggle uh, in stating who is the final authority on deciding this. What they use is the basis of acceptance of society today, which is basically majority acceptance of society, which is a problem, right? What if tomorrow majority of the people are okay with gay marriages? They are okay with children being adopted from any source, or any of this. What happens when the majority's morality fails? I hope you get an idea of where the problem lies. So this is a very complex issue, but as long as God is king, this is not a problem, because everything finally falls back into God's hands, and He is the final decision maker on every matter. And I think we will all agree that He is definitely the wisest person to make the right decision. And so that's the theocratic model versus the democratic model versus the autocratic model, and some examples in how we should do it in the church today. I hope that makes sense. Any questions? Feel free to counter question. This is not a simple topic to be able to discuss fully, but yeah, it is worth thinking through of what the biblical model is. And the other place where we get to see this is future. When we see the prophecy of the future, the millennium kingdom that is coming, who is going to rule? How is he going to rule? How is the structures implemented? So there also the same theocratic idea is brought back. Right, we will see that again. So, long answer to short question. Any other questions? All right. I hope these sessions are getting you to think and getting you to also consider the issues that we have today. The church today, well, it all started very well. Apostolic leadership, which was pretty much following the theocratic model and was driven by the Holy Spirit, to today, where we are in the church, divided, ineffective, struggling to get things together and achieve anything. And all of this is coming from a situation that is because we have failed to depend on God. And this is where the failures of the church throughout history has today become a legacy of baggage for us that we ought to overcome. We are more divided and weak to achieve the Great Commission today. But of course, God will still use us and achieve it. But the challenge is in how we go about relating to each other and relying on the Holy Spirit. And we are we have inherited a church in history now, which is full of problems, full of divisions, full of losing the foundation of the truth. And that is what we can see this slide of what happened with the Roman Catholic Church also. Good. Please continue to pray, consider what is being shared, and please feel free to raise questions and discuss matters even on the WhatsApp group. I hope this is a blessing to all of you. And thank you for joining us. And the recordings, as usual, will be on the group, and you can listen to them again and again. Thank you. May God bless you. Have a wonderful week ahead. See you next week.